What's marking the world or today's issues is Russia's war in Ukraine, which has caused insecurity issues in Europe and economic repercussions globally. On the political level, tensions are growing between West and East. Russian allies are pressured to either stand with the West in what it calls a just cause for Ukraine to defend itself or continue to partner up with Russia in different sectors of endeavors. In a situation where there is no gray zone for the US and its allies, who keep stressing the narrative that you're either with us or against us. In an important development to seek unity on urgent global challenges such as environmental disasters, economic instability, basic food and fuel shortages, cultural wars and populist nationalism, and international conflicts, the United Nations General Assembly has opened its 77th session as world powers clash and collide over Ukraine and Taiwan. The UN agenda is being undermined and stalled to find an urgent remedy to the many planetary crises. Well, over 100 world leaders have arrived in New York with two notable absentees, the Russian and Chinese leaders, and two notable attendees, the US and British leaders, who are expected to speak firmly and fervently against the Russian war in Ukraine and in support of the virtually present Ukrainian leader. This is All 24 News special coverage. Hello to the program. So I will bring in my guest immediately. We have Professor Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean of International Education and Senior International Officer at California University. Thank you and welcome for agreeing to be with us. As well as Mr. Shuaib Boutamin, Gas and Oil Advisor and CEO of Rana Drill. Thank you for agreeing to be with us, Mr. Shuaib Boutamin. And via Skype, we are joined by Abdunor Toumi, journalist and Maghreb Studies expert at Osam, Turkey. Thank you indeed, all of you, for being here with us. And before we delve into any discussion, let me share the latest. So in today's discussion, we're going to shed some lights on the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who opened the 2022 UN General Assembly on Monday by highlighting the needs to promote and execute the Sustainable Development Goals outlined by the UN in 2015. The meeting is taking place as many countries across the globe are also confronting inequality, the threat of multiple famines, increasing misinformation, the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, as well as climate and energy crisis.
This is a definitive moment. All of you here today and those tuning in from around the world give me immense hope that we can put our hands on the wheel of progress and steer a new course. That we can rescue the Sustainable Development Goals and get back on track to building the better world that leaves no one behind. The world has a long to-do list.
So let me kick it off with you, Professor or Dr. Hamoud Salhi. First of all, thank you for agreeing to be with us. And we see as though that the world is living let's say, a living hell. So many issues, so many global problems. And we see here at the UN Assembly, we see that Russia-Ukraine file or the war in Ukraine is on the top of the agenda. We see that there has been, let's say, stalling to bring any immediate solution, and thus the repercussions of the war is taking a toll, let's say, on so many economies, so many countries. How do you read the overall situation, Dr. Hamoud Salhi?
On the one hand, it is a state of affairs where we are at a time when the world is experiencing huge humanitarian, universal dangers, challenges, and especially with the COVID-19 that is sort of on its way out. Mm-hmm. The health issues are very important, have not been addressed, climate changes. There are many, many major issues. The challenge, and particularly for the United Nations General Assembly, mm-hmm. is to move beyond the rhetoric. Mm-hmm. The Secretary General seems to be very positive on some positive results. But he's also pragmatic in stating that we are a long ways from reaching a resolution on the Ukrainian crisis. This is despite the fact that he is the Secretary General, this is the United Nations, and it is the role of this organization, or this body, to take the lead on these issues.
Absolutely.
Now, understandably, you have, this is an organization that is now more for a show than anything else. There are a lot of things happening, including social parties, social events, that are planned for a year or so. The tickets in hotels is the expensive in town. So there is that social aspect of it, but the seriousness of the problems doesn't seem to go beyond giving a good speech, a speech that is designed to internal audiences more than addressing the real problems of the world community. So I mean, in many ways, we are really at a difficult time, but the United Nations General Assembly, it doesn't seem to get it.
Very nice indeed. Yeah. And Dr. Abdenoor Toumi, do you agree with our distinguished guest that, as many actually analysts are saying, that it could be just a void assembly really, and the real issues are not really going to be addressed, perhaps in talks and debates, but then no real concrete solutions to what the world is facing, Dr. Abdenoor Toumi?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being with us.
To your distinguished guest. Also, I mean, I continue the state salary of the UN. To sum up all this, the UN is now in deep division and actually to some extent being stuck in crisis from the ongoing war in Ukraine, climate change catastrophes, and even to the issue of food security. So all these together are not going in favor of the credibility of the UN. And the message actually that is hurting the 77th session of the UN, and 77 years later, I mean, it's still, again, stuck. And as you can say, the absence of the two main world leaders and Security Council members, the President of Russia, President Putin, and President of China, Xi Jinping. I mean, it says it all. So no, it takes us to, I mean, raise the question, and I believe, I mean, whether we agree with the statement of President Erdogan or not, when he actually raised this question about, and in actually 5 years ago, and he just, I think he published a book about it. I mean, the title that the world is bigger than five. So on those fives, I mean, the Security Council members who are also in deep division, and we see now the tensions between China and the US and Russia, with the France and the UK, with again Europe, and in between the American trying to review actually their strategy, and as you put it in your opening statement about the rhetoric of George W. Bush. I mean, you are either with us or against us. So all this will raise the main question for the southern countries who are seriously now worried about this, I mean, irrelevant institution and global institution, and how this, I mean, the southern countries, how will position themselves in this dynamic of division. Actually, again, they are, I mean, the southern countries, and notably the African countries, I mean, they have the right to question these institutions, and by playing, I mean, trying to position themselves, like Algeria did raise the question of why not, I mean, Africa deserves a seat at the Security Council. And ironically, I mean, President Macron, he just mentioned, I mean, just a week ago, I mean, raising the question about bringing India, and why not? But all this comes in the dynamic of division, and to some extent, occurred some institution. That, unfortunately, I mean, we're afraid to see this. I mean, its end will be or become like a League of Nations.
Absolutely, you're right, Mr. or Dr. Abdul Tumi. So technically, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, let's say, has fueled the energy crisis, and it seems that it has never been more intertwined than it has been recently, Mr. Shuaib Boutamin. And since we're speaking about energy, perhaps you could shed some light on how these issues are interrelated, speaking about climate change, speaking about food insecurity and energy crisis, causing perhaps both.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I believe the world has reached today to a closed corridor. This is the result of, I think it's a failure of the unipolar system. We see the result now. We have money crisis, we have political problems, we have food crisis, we have energy crisis.
Absolutely.
I think that the world leaders, let's say the G7, they didn't manage, they didn't plan ahead good the future of the globe.
Yeah.
And one of them, I think, is the energy issue. Yeah. I think that the European Union, I believe, they were not really aware about what would happen in the future. And they didn't give more importance to Russia. And today, I think, they know that they acknowledge that the impact of the energy crisis has been really come directly from Russia. And today, all the world, they know what means Russia in kind of energy and even for food.
Yes.
As we have seen last summer, we have seen a drought, we have seen climate change, we have seen prices of natural gas spiking, we have seen oil also, and the coal is. This is a very complex situation the world is living today in kind of energy. And the impact is not really locally in Europe. The impact is spreading to Asia, to Africa, and to the United States also. So the energy problem today is the focal point of all the world leaders. They are looking to find a solution. I think the solution can be done, but not in a very short time. The winter is coming. I believe if the world, or if Europe will leave very chilly weather, very cold weather, I think will be a difficult situation in Europe. In all, we talk about supply disruption, problems of flowing natural gas and oil from many nations. And they think that Europe will pay the bill very expensive. On the other hand, we talk a lot about the alternatives of Europe. I wanted to highlight today, let me shed the light of the alternatives of Russia. I believe that Russia has more alternatives in kind of energy compared to Europe. Russia has its neighbor to China, one of the biggest economies in the world, consuming oil and gas, consuming coal. So it's a good client for Russia. Russia has Siberia 1 pipe flowing gas from Russia to China. And in the last meeting with President Putin and the Chinese president, they decided maybe to launch the second Power Siberia 2. Both of them, they will transport 55 billion cubic meters of gas. So we talk about the alternatives of Russia. I believe it has more alternatives in kind of energy compared to the Europe.
Very nice indeed. And we will delve deeper into the energy crisis a little later. And here, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, we see how these crises are intertwined and how one crisis actually causes another. And it seems as though some of these crises are planned in a way. And as Shuaib Boutamin actually shed the light on the fact that perhaps these world leaders did not really plan ahead. They did not perhaps foresee that Russia could have alternatives, could actually have certain means, let's say, to absorb the sanctions, to cushion those sanctions by having other allies or traditional allies such as China. How do you see Russia surviving these sanctions and the possibility of emerging, let's say, at least a regional power that can actually counter the repercussions of the sanctions on Russia?
It's a very, very interesting question, and it speaks volumes about how leaders plan ahead. I think in the Russian case, there was some good planning. In other words, they understood that gas is valuable to the Europeans and made sure to maintain control of that resources. And Putin has always made it clear that the Russian security is a serious goal. It's a red line, and they would not allow a NATO expansion into Ukraine. And accordingly, they were planning, or they have been planning on this scenario for a long time. When you look at the other side, the Europeans in general, there was too much reliance on the gas to a point. For example, the British did not have storage for gas. The Germans is the same thing, even though the EU had put an 80% storage mark. In other words, the idea is to integrate or to continually working with Russia with the intent of mutual benefits. Well, the Russians had their own plan. Connected to that, so that on the issue that is very, very clear that the Russians have had planning. Now, in terms of the sanctions, in terms of what we're seeing recently, is that we are seeing a change in the world structure, a change that is shifting more and more to a polarism, and that is reflected, for example, the recent meeting in Shanghai, where both the Russians and the Chinese leaders agreed that we have to have a multipolar system. And this is a system that they called for many years ago, but also this alliance outside the Western world. The other things, and we'll see this played out in the General Assembly, the struggle or the conflict that continue to exist between the global South, that is impoverished, that is still continue to facing food shortages, and the Western countries. So the Russians have, at this point, taken advantage of presenting alternative to countries that do not see eye to eye with the United States and the Western European, and more so for the fact that the United States and the Europeans seems to take the position that, look, if you're not with us, you're against us. But the Russians and the African countries, the Asian, the Latin countries, the Latin American countries have other options, and Russia appears to be taking advantage of that. So we're in about on a verge of a new international system that is somewhat in line of what the Russians have been pushing for, along with the Chinese.
Very nice indeed. And the idea of the UN emerged over the philosophy of the fundamental role of preserving peace and security for a stable and peaceful international community. The UN was established as a global organization following the scourges of the Second World War, primarily to maintain international peace and security by taking effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, as defined in the text of the UN Charter. Where are we here, Mr. Abdunnoor Toumi, amidst all the violations that we witness continually around the world? And of course, the double standards of the West all the time were exposed, especially by the recent Ukraine war. And we see that more and more nations are sick and tired of the narrative that the US is always on the side of the angels while everyone else is on the side of the devil.
Yes, I mean, indeed. I mean, this is what is making the UN and the Security Council resolution irrelevant. And especially, I mean, the southern countries who don't, I mean, to some extent, began to don't believe in this institution at all. And speaking of the violation of those resolutions, I mean, there is an example of the colonial states toward the Palestinians and so on. So, and of course, I mean, this is why the veto actually lethal weapon. I mean, it doesn't work for the people who need this. So this is, again, why is making the UN irrelevant. And as it was stated before by your distinguished guest, by the unilateralism, and that was, I mean, a narrative and an imperative that was set in following the fall of the Soviet Union 3 decades ago. So this is why, I mean, what is happening these days, and notably the last week meeting in Samarkand, and the message that was sent strongly by the Russian leaders and the Chinese leaders, and also the presence of Turkey in it. So it is very strong. I mean, all these main, regional or rising states are positioning themselves and also imposing a new alternative to this unilateralism, preaching for multilateralism and giving more voice to the voiceless and who are unfortunately suffering a great deal from this injustice and also the, senseless decisions of the big, or the so-called the big fives at the UN, and notably coming from the Western Hemisphere.
Very nice indeed. And since Dr. Hamoud Salhi mentioned earlier, Mr. Shaib Batamin, the Shanghai Organization, how do you see this organization economically speaking? And maybe we can bring up the organization of the BRICS into the discussion as an alternative for these, let's say, traditional allies of Russia to actually save itself from the crumbling world economy, maybe at least to cushion some of the repercussions that we are seeing globally, having a big toll on the Western economy. And when we say Western economy, of course, we say global economy in general. So is this, let's say, going to be a strong regional power when we speak about the BRICS, when we speak about the Shanghai Organization? Or maybe it's something going to be a little, let's say, insignificant in comparison to what the West have built, I mean, economically speaking?
Yeah, for sure. The SCU, the Shanghai meeting, the SCU and the BRICS are the rivals of the G7 and the European Union. If we compare the European Union, it's a geographic location and many countries are inside. If we compare it also to SCU, it includes China, India and Russia. And three countries, big three countries, are also members of the BRICS. So the BRICS has more dimension. It has BRICS, it has Brazil inside. So it's multi-continental bloc. And the SCU is a regional, it's Asian bloc. So we can compare it to the European Union and the other to G7. I think that the SCU at this moment, it's time, and both China and Russia, they acknowledge that it's time to tighten their relationship. Because in the SCU, they have 25% of the global GDP in the SCU. Similar 25-30% in the BRICS. It's home to 40% of the global humanitarian price of power, electricity, for rental, transportation, the fuel, everything expensive. If we see now to the China and Russia inside the SCU, the Shanghai, the meeting, I will talk about it now, they have less power compared, because Russia is selling its gas and oil to China and India with discounted values. And this will enforce their economies and do it open window for these economies to grow up and to ramp up in a very short time. I believe in the future, both BRICS and SCU will be vital rivals for the G7 and for European Union, because they have all the means of development. They have a good workforce, and they have a cheap prices, cheap energy prices. And I think this is very high value for the economy. In the future, I believe, if we take also Brazil also is very big nation in American continent, and has a very developing economy compared to Europe at the moment. So all of these countries, including we have China, we have South Africa, you have India, all these nations will participate to create an imbalance between the West and the Western, the West and the Eastern countries. I think that with these conditions, actually, European Union is going to a crunch, economical crunch in the future. especially if the European Union members, if they will leave a critical situation in kind of energy, if they will have a very cold winter, I think that will be a very big issue inside Europe. And those blocks, BRICS and also SCU, will be a good alternative for the humanity, and maybe will be created another polar. We are talking about unipolar now, but maybe will be 2 or 3 polars in the future. And this is very good to create maybe justice for the humanity and to run the economy forward.
Very nice indeed. And Dr. Hamoud Salhi, is it really going to be, let's say, a bipolar more than a multipolar world? Let's say here, the way I see it like China, especially about the blocks, the economic bloc that Mr. Shaib Batamin was highlighting just now. It seems that Russia is the junior power in comparison to China. At the same time, here we see the US is still the US. I mean, we cannot just undermine the US and saying that it is crumbling and all of a sudden we're going to see all the world order that we were used to crumbles all of a sudden. There must be a countermeasure that the West is preparing regarding that. So is this really a threat for the West as a whole and for the European Union and for the United States? Or is just something that is going to be, let's say, in competition just for a while, and then maybe we see the US, let's say, prevailing?
So let's step back a little bit before the Ukraine crisis. The United States had launched its major initiative under President Joe Biden, depicting the Russians and the Chinese as enemies of the United States, strategic enemies. If you remember, there was a visit from the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary of States, to various places in the world, including Africa. The United States built military bases or temporary military bases in more than 30 countries in Africa. At the same time, the Chinese had, economic relationship with everyone in Africa. The Russians were also moving forward with some strategic military weapons.
That's the interesting side about China actually dealing with everyone without asking them to change their democracy or the way they govern. They don't care. They just deal with the country. But then in comparison, we see the US trying to dictate certain rules.
And that's really what is the problem for the United States. So for today, what we're seeing, this pattern that is evolving, and one is that we talk about the Shanghai Group. But the Shanghai Group is more of a security pact than an economic pact. You have now the shift into bloc politics, where you have, the Asians have their own blocs, ASEAN and others, the Latin Americans and the BRICS, and now Shanghai, for example, that has been for quite some time. All these blocs have been dormant for quite some time. It was really, they were more like meetings where you gather, certain meetings were to play jokes, to have, fun get together, like the Davos meetings and things like that. What's very, very interesting is that with this Ukrainian crisis, is that these blocs have shown that they can actually do things, very practical thing, that the camaraderie, that the relationship they built along the years are now forging into strong relationship. We see this in the BRICS, and we see this in the Chinese, Russian, in the recent meeting in Shanghai. Now, when you look at the European, what you see is a fragmentation of the EU. The issues now is that, look, the colder, it will not be cold in certain areas, so I'm not worried about the energy crisis. And then, there is the Central Europe versus the Southern Europe. For Europe, the European Union is a major, major crisis. It is fragmented. The US-European relationships are also in decline. They've never been the same way today, like they were today. There is a huge, huge crisis. So on one hand, we see this bloc politics, the revival of old institutions that we thought, they were not there just for fun, except for our region, which is, Northern Africa and the Middle East, where the Arab system is still dormant, and why that is something that we have to consider. But these two things that are running, on the one hand, you have the European Union, the Western countries, systems, these blockades are in declining and fragmenting, while other institutions are growing stronger. It is that pattern that would evolve into what I see as a multilateral system, where you have the Russians, the Chinese playing one polar perhaps, the Americans and the European, the two other polars. Yeah.
Very nice indeed. And Dr. Abdenour Toumi, the UN chief said some things can't wait, among them education, dignified jobs, comprehensive health care, and action to tackle the climate crisis. He called for public and private financing and investment, and above all, for peace. Do you think these issues can be really tackled among all what we have been discussing, the rivalry between world powers?
I mean, yes, it is, because our virtues themes, and they need to be tackled and to be looked at. But this comes comes with the local government public policies. And also when it comes to the, I want just to add a word on the future of the international system, or the world order that is taking place. So the question here, we're heading toward a multipolar system, because the question of the bipolar system, it doesn't hold much, because we are in the end of the ideologies and after the fall of the Soviet Union, and ended that dynamic of conflict. So this is why now all these rising states who are imposing their narrative toward actually geographically in the limit place that they are practicing in, and sending a strong message to the again global leader, and it's still the US. And the US knows well, and Americans are very smart when it comes to the issue of change and how they move their pawns accordingly toward their national interests. So this is why today, and as Dr. Sarhi raised this very, very good question, I mean, MENA, where is MENA today? And we have been seeing this, all these scramble that is taking place in the world. And the Arab countries, notably the Arab countries, are still timid, and not dormant, but are timid to take a lead. I mean, they are having this golden opportunity. And again, I will have this positive note. We are looking forward for the Arab League summit that will be taking place in Algiers, and hopefully will be actually the wake-up call for the Arab leaders to position themselves on world stage.
Yes, we were speaking once upon a time about the Maghreb Union and the Arab, let's say, countries to come together and perhaps constitute, let's say, a strong economy. But then there is a lot of division inside the Arab world, and we see that at least two countries cannot actually get along. And we see how successful the Gulf Council actually was. I mean, why don't we see, for example, Arab world just coming all together and constituting, let's say, a strong economy? What is the potential of that? How likely can that be done, Mr. Shuaib Toumi?
It's a very interesting question. I believe that the upcoming summit of the Arab League, which will be held in Algeria on the 1st and the 2nd November, will be a new launch, will give a new launch to interrelations between the Arab League members. I think that the Arabs, let's say the Arab League, did a very good role in 16 and 17, but later on, we have seen some divergency and among also the Gulf countries. But I think this time, the summit in Algeria is particular. There is a world crisis of energy. And among these countries, Algeria, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia, very huge big producer of natural gas and oil in the world. And I think they have a major role to play in the planet. Algeria, I think with Libya in North Africa, they can add the value to the European market. There is a shortage of energy. There is some issues, I think, inside the Arab League members, maybe political issues, I believe. But from the economical side, we have to sit down, I think, and we have to plan ahead of the future, of our future. Because something is very good in Arab League is that there are two continents, Asia and Africa. Africa is very close to European markets in kind of energy, and Asia, Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf countries, they can cover the Asian market and the promising market of, let's say, Indonesia, China, and other countries. So the Arab League, if we see the map, it's covering a good area of the map, and we can tie very good economic relation, and we can, I think, in my side, we can ramp up our production of oil and gas in the future. We can play a very important role in this crisis, and I believe that what's living in Europe today, they have issue of energy, and the main concern for them is to find alternatives. I think that the Arab League can play a very important role in this way, and we can unify our decisions, unify our commitments, engagement, and we can take something more important, and we don't give up just to diversify our work, our task inside the Arab League, and I think this is a valuable opportunity for Algeria and for all the Arabs to cooperate more and show to the world that the Arabs can add a value, and they show their presence in this map, in this globe, and instead to blame them for increasing the oil prices, maybe they will help more the market by injecting more oil and gas.
Very nice indeed. And as a final question, you get to give us the final answer, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Since we've been speaking about this union of the Arab coming together, well, we've been disappointed so many times. And here, maybe just to look at the other option, say the Arabs do not come together. What opportunities does Algeria have amidst all these crises? We know that in every war, every crisis, there is always an opportunity that a country or another could actually benefit from. So where do you see Algeria positions amidst all this?
No, Algeria has done very well, and it is using this crisis and as an opportunity to emerge better economically, politically, security-wise, and comprehensively. You see it with the visit of Macron to the United States, to Algeria. Yes. My apologies, and where the president outlined a major strategy of how to view the Algerian-French relationship, a relationship that is based, as he said in his opening meeting, comprehensive, that included clear guidelines, and it's based on the assessment that has been done since 2012. That is the president outlining how this relationship should be used. And you could see it again with the Italian, with other places. So in many ways, what we're seeing is using this opportunity to emerge stronger and better. Now, in terms of the Arab League, I think it's a huge assignment to get all the Arab world together. But if we step back and look at the other historical experience, remember how the European Union came to be today. It started with an idea, with a few countries, and with one commodity, it emerged to other commodity, and over years, it was built as an entity, albeit with difficult challenge, but it survived. What the Arab League is missing is that kind of focus on one aspect. At one point, during the crisis of the 1970s, we thought oil was one issue. We also thought that we could do another product, but it didn't happen. So the Algerians are playing a very, very important role. What will emerge from this Arab League meeting, not big ideas or anything, but what will emerge is a path how to strengthen this Arab world with a practical solution. Will the Arab world follow? I don't think so, based on what we have read so far. But Algeria is determined to see this as a practical, addressing the Arab world issues practically and for the benefit of the vast majority of the Arab world.
Very nice indeed, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Thank you so much for all these thorough analysis. Professor Shuaib Boutamin, thank you so much for all these thorough analysis. And Abdul to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News. That's the end. Bye for now.